But when Herod heard of it, he said, "John, whom I beheaded, has been raised." For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him. But she did not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his couriers and officers and for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, "Ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it." And he solemnly swore to her, "Whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half of my kingdom." She went out and said to her mother, "What should I ask for?" She replied, "The head of John the Baptizer." Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, "I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The king was deeply grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in the tomb.
Many are thinking now, Pastor Neil, what are you going to do with that? Two stories there of Amos and preaching into the palace, if you will, of the king, speaking truth to the king. John speaking truth to the king, and we know what happens to him. What do you do with that? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'll look around and see if I'm the only one wearing a necktie. So this is coming off. I don't know about you, but when I see somebody that looks warm, I feel even warmer. So I hope this helps you cool off. Back in my seminary days, back at Earlham School of Religion. Earlham School of Religion, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is not one of the United Church of Christ seminaries. It is actually a Quaker school, Religious Society of France. And as you know, the Quakers are a pacifist group, believe in pacifism. And they, one of the things that they often would do is they would give voice to other voices within the history of Christianity. One of the texts that was a book that we were asked to read was a book by Phyllis Tribble. She was a professor at Union Theological Seminary back in the 80s, and she wrote this book titled Texts of Terror, T-E-X-T-S, Texts of Terror. And she displayed a great deal of courage in writing on this subject. In the book, she looks at some of the most horrific texts in the Old Testament. These are pages from the Bible that some of us might wish we could accidentally drop between our desk and the wall and have them be lost forever. For example, there's the heart-wrenching story of Jephthah's daughter in the book of Judges. The little girl loses her life because of her father's foolish promise that he would sacrifice the first thing that he sees upon his return home from a victorious battle, and who should run out of the house to greet him but his daughter. Much like Herod making a promise, only to wish he hadn't. And there's another horrific story in Judges about a woman who was taken by a group of men. They tortured her, they beat her, and they raped her. And when she comes home to her husband, more dead than alive, in anger, he kills her. Cuts her body up into 12 pieces, which he distributes to the 12 tribes of Israel. And then there is in Deuteronomy the command given to the people that they have the right to take as plunder all the women and livestock in the cities that will accept their offer of peace. They are to take them, but they are not to harm them. But for certain nations, the Israelites were told to completely destroy them. Everyone, everything. Who in their right minds wants to preach on texts like these? The answer in my book is no one. The people who put the lectionary together that I usually start with, not always, but I usually start with the lectionary each Sunday. I look at the lectionary, see what the readings are assigned for that day, and wrestle with them sometimes. And this was assigned for today. And I thought this is a time where maybe I should do some wrestling with this one. People who put the lectionary know this. They know how hard some of these texts are, and they tend to leave them out. We preachers, especially this year, this summer, we nicely progressed through a summer of readings from Mark's Gospel. There's the calling of the disciples. There's Jesus is doing a handful of parables, teaches using a handful of parables, and a few miracles are performed. All is good. And then boom, out of the blue, there it is, Mark's own text of terror. Today's is not an easy sermon. The story of the beheading of John is gruesome. The events leading up to it are hard to believe. Herod, the king, definitely is a mixed bag. He divorced his wife so he could marry his brother's wife, Herodias. Herodias was not just the wife of Herod's half-brother, she was also the daughter of another of Herod's half-brothers. So, in a sense, when Herod married Herodias, he was marrying his sister-in-law and his niece at the same time. That was a clear violation of Old Testament law. John the Baptizer publicly denounces the marriage. Herodias, of course, is furious. And Herod was angry too, but at least he has a little bit of a conscience. He genuinely did not want to kill John. Mark tells us that Herod was confused by John's preaching, but he liked to listen to him. Herod respected John and a bit, I think, feared him a little bit. Because John seemed to be a very righteous person, and the people followed him, they respected him. He was popular amongst the people. Unfortunately, Herod chooses cowardice over courage. Rather than stand up for what he believed, he gave in to the selfish obsession of his wife, Herodias. Herod ordered John beheaded, and the head presented on a platter to his wife's daughter, who then takes it and presents it to her mother. Why would people who put the preaching lectionary together include this story? Where's the hope in it? It's clearly a story where evil triumphs over good. The righteous man loses his life. The weak and vengeful people get away with murder. It's a sordid tale of anger and revenge, resentment and death. The name of Jesus is only mentioned as a means of setting up the story. I think to understand this story a little bit better, like in so many passages of the scriptures, it helps to know what comes right before this. The story of John's beheading follows Jesus' instructions to his disciples. Jesus tells them how they are to embody God's love in the world. And he tells them that they should expect opposition and even trouble. All they need to take with them, they're told, is the gospel and trust in God. By the time Mark is telling us the story, Jesus has been preaching his message throughout Galilee. And I think Mark is trying to make 2 points by including the details of John's death. First, there is danger when you tell the truth, especially to those in power. The story of John's death reminds us that being a Christian does not guarantee success in life, but very likely will bring some suffering. Secondly, this story of the delusions of the power. This is a story of the delusions of the powerful. Herod is afraid. Herod killed John. He thinks Jesus is John raised from the dead. Now he thinks that John has come back to get him in the form of this new prophet healer, Jesus. In other words, even defenseless, unarmed, decapitated dead men like John the baptizer can come back to haunt those who use the power for evil. There are numerous examples of this in history. One of the things that kept Gandhi going against overwhelming odds was the conviction that love would conquer, that evil would defeat itself. Gandhi said this, "When I despair, I remember that throughout history, tyrants and dictators have always failed in the end." Think of it. Always. Oscar Romero was appointed Archbishop of El Salvador because the church hierarchy thought he was a safe, conservative scholar. He had a conversion of sorts and made a complete turnaround and became a champion of the poor and spoke out against the oppressive government forces. He won the love of the people and the hatred of those in power. And he was gunned down on a Sunday while lifting up the communion wafer at the altar of the cathedral. Instantly, Romero became an unstoppable spiritual force in the hearts of the Salvadorian people and a symbol of freedom and justice around the world. The story of the beheading of John makes crystal clear that God's work can be risky. When you do it, don't expect accolades or success. When you speak the truth to the powerful, there may be a bit of price to pay. But no matter what may happen, God's plan cannot be stopped. Barbara Brown Taylor tells the story of a teacher who was fired from his job 6 months short of his retirement after 25 years. It was a nasty piece of work on the part of his superiors. They wanted to punish him for challenging them and making an example for anyone else thinking about trying the same thing. They called it early retirement, gave him a party, and forced him to suffer for it. Weeks later, he made the comment that I've been to my own funeral, recounting the pain of that party. I've lost my students, my program, my livelihood, and my pride. But you know what? There really is life after death. I'm doing things I always wanted to do, never had the time. I'm spending time with my wife. I'm finding energy I thought I'd lost forever. Getting crucified turned out better than I thought. Tough lesson today from this account in Mark. Those who follow Jesus must not give in to the naive notions that being faithful to God will make it easy. It doesn't. John lived for the truth and he died because of it. John Chrysostom was a great preacher of the 5th century. And he said of the beheading of John, Herod cut off his head, but he could not cut off his voice. No matter what evil people may say or do, the voice of the gospel will not be silenced. And I thank God for those over the years and still today who risk everything to make certain it is heard. The question is, in our own way and in our own circumstances, are we among them? Am I among them?